sensing this danger. This is the greatest showman! He is floating on air now! He's going to send it back.
It's the Multicultural AFL Footy Show with Vanessa Harbir and George Gracios.
Hello and welcome to the Multicultural AFL Footy Show. I am Vanessa, and on tonight's panel we have Harbir and George. Hello guys.
Hello Vanessa.
Hi Harbir, hi Vanessa.
Hi,
coming up on our show, we also have a special guest interview with journalist and author Michael Warner on his latest book, The Boys Club, which could be described as an eye-opening portal into the AFL organization. Michael was interviewed early today by our panelist Harbir.
Yes Vanessa, the interview is quite interesting to say the least.
I'm looking forward to it, Harbir. But first, round 12 broke some very exciting footy all around. The unrelenting Swans had another last quarter win by 9 points, this time over St Kilda, and Collingwood hung on grimly to beat an inaccurate Adelaide by 5 points. Melbourne continues to top the AFL ladder after thoroughly beating Brisbane by 22 points to top-notch their 11th victory for the year, while the Dreamtime game from Optus turned into a nightmare from Essendon, who went down to the Tigers by 39 points. The West Coast Eagles at the SCG played an outstanding last quarter of footy to defeat the luckless Carlton side by 22 points. And over in Perth, the Western Bulldogs shook off a determined, very injury-depleted Freo side to win easily in the early 28 points. What are your thoughts, George?
Well, the Indigenous round was kicked off by Melbourne taking on Brisbane, and Brisbane were superb in the opening half, going into the halftime break with a 20-point lead, and it was almost a case of how far and how easy will Brisbane win this particular match. But Melbourne, so often during this season, showed resilience. They had a fantastic second half, and it's appropriate that one of their Indigenous players, Keziah Pickett, was one of the star performers, kicking 3 goals. Christian Petracca, also a star performance. He would have to be one of the favourites for the Brownlow medal based on his performances so far, Harbir.
Yeah, Melbourne passing every test, as we keep on saying that, and it's fantastic. It's their premiership to lose at the moment, the way they are going. And on the other side, Sydney versus St Kilda. I think Sydney has brought that pressure on St Kilda. Otherwise, I think St Kilda didn't perform that bad. I think it was just probably the Higgins. If he would have kicked a little bit straighter, that could have been the difference between the winning and the losing. But good thing was it was a respectable loss to St Kilda as well. And Sydney, they are just hanging on in the few of the games, and then at the end just getting that very important 4 points.
Yeah, well, you talk about those bad misses, Harbir. It was a respectable loss, yes, but it's almost cost them any chance they had of making the top 8, which is really disappointing because St Kilda were one of the feel-good stories from last season. There was a lot of expectation on them for this season. Definitely. And it's just a real pity that their season has just petered out. Those misses, they'll be really disappointed they weren't able to capitalise. The Sydney Swans, good on them. They hung in there, and sure, they live to fight another day and they take on the Hawks, but we'll preview that a bit later. Collingwood back in the winner's circle after a hard-fought win against Adelaide. A welcome return for Jamie Elliott. Career-high 6 goals. What a blistering opening quarter. He kicked 4 goals. And his reappearance straightens Collingwood. They needed that dynamic forward, and he makes them play a lot straighter. So it was a great result in a very, very tough match.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are feeling the injury issues, but I think Collingwood is probably feeling the most of it with the Taylor Adams and a few others. Add those players into it, and I think it's a totally different team. So I think at the moment they haven't been able to go to the depth that in the players. That's why they kept on losing the games. But definitely a good signs for Collingwood in the season forward. And Jamie Elliott, as you mentioned, he was superb on that night. And Richmond, they'll find a way to win. They will. They are again, like, there's a reason they are premiers, and especially when we saw that in the 4th quarter when all the momentum was with Essendon at that stage, and to bounce back. Not many teams can do that when the other team has got the momentum, and then to break that momentum and overpower them, it's not easy. But Richmond, being Richmond, they were able to do that. But what a clash! What a treat for the packed stadium that we had over there. It was a special clash, and it lived up to its expectations.
Yeah, well, that was a match that would have been played at the MCG. Dreamtime at the G, except it was played in Perth, and well done to the Perth faithful. They're supportive of the matches in Perth. They came out in force to see a wonderful match, and they were rewarded with some fantastic performances. Shea Bolton, again, was the star for Richmond, scored some valuable goals. Essendon were brave, but they were just overpowered in that awesome 15-minute display. In that last quarter, Richmond just put the foot down and totally blew Essendon away. It was just blistering, and the rest of the competition has been put on notice, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And West Coast, that was a surprising match for them to be winning with that many injuries aside. But I think what Carlton has done, apart from the other favours to West Coast, they brought Liam Ryan back. The way he performed, I think they've awakened the beast, because we've been missing those marks and that kind of a performance for Liam Ryan.
Another mark of the year, possibly.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. So they've done a lot of disadvantage to the other team to bring him into the form. So all in all, Carlton should have won that one with the injuries, but that shows you that West Coast, like they showed more hunger, and there are many more flaws that need to be addressed at Carlton. I think looks like they've started an external review of the football department as well. So let's see what they come up with, but there's needs to be some introspection done.
Yeah, it was another opportunity gone begging for the Blues. Going into the match, they would have been confident of finally notching up a win. West Coast weren't at their best with so many injuries. Luke Shuey, Tim Kelly, Josh Kennedy, Jeremy McGovern. So they would have eyed off an opportunity to win the match. They just weren't good enough. They weren't hungry enough. They weren't ferocious in attacking the ball. They just seemed to be really pedestrian at times, Carlton. So there's a lot of soul-searching at Princes Park, and you talk about the external review, so that'll be interesting to see what that brings out. But a team that did really well away from home again, the Western Bulldogs, your favourite players, defeating a plucky Fremantle. Of course, they have their injury worries as well, but the Bulldogs, like good sides do, won the tough 50-50 balls and showed enough resilience and aptitude and fortitude to win a tough match.
Yeah, definitely. And a couple of positives that Liba was able to break that shackle around him, which was put on him in the last game as well, and he couldn't perform. And Bontempelli, he's a superstar, and the way Aaron Norton's taking the mark, it's a very good sign for Bulldogs. Having said that, huge credit to Fremantle, the way they played. There's a reason they've been undefeated this year at that ground, and they put up a very good show, so it was a great game to watch.
Also was the first time the Western Bulldogs win in that ground.
Yeah.
Great achievement.
Yeah. Thank you for that, guys. We have more, including the interview with Michael Warner on the other side of this short break. You are with the Multicultural AFL Footy Show. Earlier on today, Michael Warner, the award-winning investigative journalist with the Herald Sun, also member of the Radio 3AW's football team, and the author of the latest book, The Boys Club, The Rise of the AFL Organization, was interviewed by Harbir Singh.
Our special guest this evening is Michael Warner, author of The Boys Club, which lifts the lid on the scandals, secrets and deals that have shaped the AFL. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Harbir.
Yeah, Michael, what prompted to write The Boys Club, taking on AFL and its culture?
Well, I've been reporting on AFL probably for 20 years. I started at the Herald Sun in Melbourne in late 1998, and as you would know, football is a religion in the southern states of Australia, and no more so here than in Melbourne. And I reported on and off footy for probably the first 10 years, and I've done it full time for the last 12 years. And through that era, you know, I've covered some of the biggest off-field scandals, I suppose, in the history of the game. Carlton salary cap cheating saga of 2002, the West Coast Eagles illicit drugs crisis after that, the Melbourne tanking. The big daddy of them all was the Essendon drug saga. There's been several since, the Talia brothers, etc. So having covered all of those big stories and been at the coalface, I suppose, one thing that annoyed me a bit as a journalist is, and in particular I look in the book at sort of the way that the AFL is able to police its own integrity investigations, more often than not starting with a preferred outcome. How do we want this to end? Usually for a commercial benefit that's better than maybe another one. And so it frustrated me a bit having covered so many of those scandals.
Other parts, yep.
But the show would roll on and it would be forgotten. So I just wanted to put all my experiences of covering this game in one place so football supporters like yourself could read it and see what's been going on.
Your book has a great deal of information about the questionable decisions and the lack of transparency behind closed doors from AFL catering operations, football administrations, blunder cover-ups and conflicts of interest. As you describe the AFL's hierarchy as authoritarian, controlling its appointments, PR, the game style, outcomes and its attitude to the clubs, does this manipulative influence go beyond to the players, coaches and perhaps games officials?
Well, the Code of Australian Rules Football, and the AFL is the national body. It's its own world governing body, if you like. Unlike other Australian sports like cricket, where there's an ultimate body, the IOC, International Cricket Council, or soccer. There's always someone higher up the food chain, FIFA or something like that. But such as the product that we have of our game, that they are sort of judge, jury, executioner. So it's a fascinating sort of situation that's evolved. They don't pay tax, for example, the Australian Football League, even though they bring in sort of $700-800 million in revenue, they pay themselves salaries, secret salaries, some of them. We don't know what the CEO of the AFL, Gillum McLachlan, earns. And yet, as I say, some of these integrity matters, I feel like that if they're going to have those privileges, that they probably need to tighten up in these integrity spaces that I talk about. But it's a huge industry, as we know. One of the things that I found in the book, though, it's a bit of a closed shop, a boys' club, as I call it, invites only. And if you're on the outside agitating, whether it be a journalist or a player agent, that life can be made quite difficult for you. And so I set out a whole series of reforms in my book as to the way that the great game can be better. And look, on one measure, the AFL is streets ahead of every other sporting code, certainly commercially. But I think there's another measuring stick, and that's the way that you treat people, the way you investigate integrity, for example, transparency and accountability. So they're the reasons I say, or the aspects I say they can improve on.
Another aspect of the boys' club deals with the drugs, wages and tax issues, as well as the harassment and bullying against the women in the AFL. Why have those issues gone on so long?
Yeah, well, this is a disturbing thing that I came across in my research for the book, and that was the number of women who detailed to me grievances of what they said was an unsafe workplace, either at head office, AFL House, or some of the state bodies. And I guess that's something that all businesses around the world are dealing with. We know what's happening in federal parliament, for example. And I think the AFL too needs to look at the things that have been going on within its own organisation. And I know that Richard Goyder, the chairman of the AFL Commission, has said that he will look into this sort of stuff. They are taking it seriously, and hopefully they do. One of the interesting things about the AFL hierarchy, if you like, is they have a commission system that sits above the game. Like a board, if you like. And it was created in 1984, supercharged in 1993. But the real power, as I say in the book, is actually no longer at the commission table. It's the body under it. It's the AFL executive. That's where Andrew Demetriou ran for so long, and now Gillum McLachlan, his successor. And that's really where the power is in the game. And the commissioners that sit above that are almost sort of out of sight, out of mind. Most live interstate. And I say one of my recommendations is they need to reassert their authority over that executive to ensure that the game is better governed.
And briefly, what was the reason why the AFL wanted to undermine the $44 million Australian bid for the Soccer World Cup? How and who inside the AFL instigated that?
Yeah, well, if you can remember back, it was 2010 when Australia announced that it was going to bid for a World Cup of soccer. I think it was either in 2018 or 2022. And there was a little bit of argy-bargy behind the scenes. You can imagine that the AFL would have been quite wary of the concept of the World Game coming to Australia and potentially, I suppose, stealing the hearts and minds of the Australian rules football part. I don't think personally that was ever going to happen. There was always going to be some dispute over stadium access. For example, if the World Cup of Soccer was going to be played in the middle of winter, you know, what grounds would the AFL be unable to access Melbourne Cricket Ground or other stadiums? But one of the things that I found in researching the book is that the AFL had become aware of the identity of a couple of lobbyists that Football Federation Australia had hired to help get this event to Australia, and it was put to me that they were quite active in trying to make sure that some journalists around town became aware of this sort of identity of these lobbyists. So, in a way, to undermine the event. I'm sure it's a shame that we never got the World Cup. I'm certainly not saying we never got a World Cup because the AFL undermined it, but it was a bit of an insight into the way that this powerful body works, and certainly when it comes to people that it might see as a threat.
COVID-19 has extensively impacted the AFL, both financially and with their infrastructure in such a big way as to endanger its existence. And what reform measures does the AFL have to take moving forward for the organisation?
Well, before COVID, the AFL had become an enormously powerful entity. They had 795 staff on the books, which is actually the same number of players almost that you have in the AFL. There's about 800 players in the competition, and you've got almost as many staff servicing them. So before COVID, maybe as a benefit to the game, they have reduced that size. It's unfortunate for a lot of those people. 80% of the staff in the AFL was stood down, and many never returned after the COVID pandemic hit. And the same is applied to clubs, where a lot of the club expenditure has reduced significantly. I don't think necessarily that slowing down of the arms race of spending in football is a bad thing for the game. It's obviously very sad for the people who lost their jobs, but I think the expenditure in football had been getting quite out of control. So some good things will come of COVID. I'll tell you the best thing that came out of COVID, though, which we learned, is when we were playing matches in empty stadiums. We realised, and I hope that head office realised, that the magic of the game, as much as the skill of the players is on show, it's actually the people in the outer, you and me, up in the stands yelling out. And footy without fans was really quite soulless. And so I think that for all the damage that COVID did, it's also done some good things just to sort of check where we were going with footy. And ultimately, footy's about the people.
Yeah, definitely. Good luck with your book, and thank you, Michael, for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, Harbir.
Welcome back as we continue with our previews of the weekend's games, starting with the game tonight between Port Adelaide and Geelong. Friday evening, Sydney play Hawthorn. Saturday, Fremantle hosts the Gold Coast, and St Kilda play the Adelaide Crows. Sunday, North Melbourne take on the GWS Giants, while the West Coast hosts Richmond at Optus. And Monday, traditional Queen's birthday clash between Melbourne and Collingwood. Where that will be played is anybody's guess. Harbir, what are your thoughts?
Well, with regards to Port Adelaide and Geelong, I think Geelong has that tendency of not performing well after the buys, this year might not be an exception, and especially Port Adelaide have got their tails up at the moment, the way they are performing. So if Geelong can put their act together and probably want to get rid of that, they have the potential to do that. But Port Adelaide, to me, I think they might come on the top with that in that regard, because they've just got that bit of extra edge. But the injuries might play in the Geelong's favour, the injuries that Port Adelaide has got at the moment. So Geelong has a good chance to win, but because of the bye thing that's attached to them, so I'm sticking to Port Adelaide for this one.
Well, the break might have done Geelong the world of good, so it could actually work to their advantage for a change, because as you touched on before, Harbir, their record after buys has been horrific in recent seasons, and it's almost derailed their back half of the season. So I think they finally worked out how to prepare themselves and how to plan. They'll be coming out with all guns blazing, I would expect. Port Adelaide, they've been terrific as well at home. They'll be buoyed by home crowd support, one of the few venues around the country that can have almost capacity crowds. So they'll be there cheering their players on, and they'll get a boost from that, the Port Adelaide players. But I'm not going to discount Geelong by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah. Next clash, Sydney versus Hawthorn. Sydney at home, terrific form up there. Hawthorn have been woeful. Sydney for me.
Yeah, I think it pretty straightforward with that one. I think it's Sydney for me as well. Hawks, I don't think they stand a chance at this stage. Sorry.
Thanks, Harbir.
Yeah. And with the Fremantle and Gold Coast, that's going to be a close game, I suppose. Both teams are sort of at par, but because of the injury carnage, I'm going with the Gold Coast for this one.
Yeah, look, I agree. Gold Coast are building very slowly but surely. And then the Saints take on Adelaide. The Saints will hope and pray that they can actually kick straight. So Higgins and Maxi King, if you're watching tonight, get your kicking boots on, please.
Yeah, definitely. But Adelaide they will be ruining their chances as well against Collingwood. They would say that we had that win, so they missed by that much. So they're going to be coming out strong. So to me, it's going to be Adelaide for that.
Yeah, North Melbourne taking on the Giants in Tasmania of all places. Now, North Melbourne have some reasonable efforts up there. They beat Hawthorn there, so they would fancy their chances.
Yeah, definitely. So I am sort of going for an upset in that one. I think North Melbourne might be able to secure another win, giving them that sort of advantage with that ground. And West Coast versus Richmond are like, we can sort of say a lot of things about that. I think that factor with the West Coast, what has happened in the last game, I think that they needed that kind of a boost with all the injuries they have, and they needed that sort of boost, especially to play against Richmond. But Richmond at the moment, the way they are playing, they will be too strong for West Coast for me.
Yeah, I agree with you, Harbir. Richmond showed in that effort against Essendon that they are a force to be reckoned with. And the final game of the round sees Melbourne versus Collingwood. Ordinarily, this would be a fantastic match, but Collingwood have been very disappointing. We know how fantastic Melbourne have been. I would expect Melbourne to have an easy win.
Yeah, the way Collingwood have performed so far in this season, I think it's probably no-brainer at this stage, unless they can come up with some extra hunger or some extra strategy comes from Nathan Buckley at the moment. But the way things are, I don't think any team pretty much stand a chance against Melbourne the way they are doing it. So it's a Melbourne for me.
The teams with a bye this week are Brisbane, Carlton, Essendon and Western Bulldogs. Remember to check with your local media closer to the game day for the latest details of times and venues. Which brings me to my footy tips this week. This week I'm going for Geelong, Sydney, Gold Coast, Adelaide, GWS Giants, Richmond and Melbourne. That is all we have time for this week. You can also watch us in Adelaide on Channel 44 Friday evenings, on Aurora Foxtel TV at midnight Saturday, and on the NEMBC YouTube. You are listening to this podcast on the Community Radio Network, and the AFL Diversity Language News can be heard on national multicultural radio stations. I am Vanessa Gatica.
I'm Harbir Singh.
And I'm George Gracias.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Ryan, crowd really sensing this danger.